Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today's the 10th of September 2021. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So, the first day of Gitcoin Grants matching round 11 has been amazing. I mean, you can see here, Gitcoin put out a tweet and there were 4,600 contributions from 351 people, totaling $36,701 in just the first day, with 465 grants contributed towards. And yeah, I mean, you can still go donate. Of course, this is only day 1 of 15, but this is amazing to see. I mean, I would love to see just millions being donated, and we have a $950,000 matching pool, over the next 2 weeks to support everything that's happening on Gitcoin here. But I won't go into it again. I spoke about it yesterday. Just go donate if you haven't yet. You've got 2 weeks, and I think it's your duty as an Ethereum to do so. All right, I think for the majority of this refuel, I'm going to be talking about scaling again. Sorry, guys. I feel like a scaling dad at this point, but I think it's like a really important thing to talk about right now in the context of just where this ecosystem is, where it's going, and a lot of confusion as well around right now. So I guess I want to start with this tweet from Scott Lewis, who says, the Ethereum community needs to do 3 things: embrace sidechains, embrace rollups, and build. That's it. And I wrote today's newsletter about this. But essentially, I mean, I fully agree with him here. I think that the Ethereum community is probably being too pure right now when they need to be more pragmatic. And what I mean by this is that they're kind of like, I wouldn't say the whole Ethereum community, I would say some parts of it are kind of like, well, sidechains are just a temporary thing. We shouldn't worry about them because we have rollups coming and it's all going to be well and dandy. I have never personally taken that view. And obviously Polygon's POS chain, which, I mean, some people call it a side chain, some people call it a commit chain, some people call it layer 2, but I think the best technical explanation of what it is a side chain or a commit chain. It definitely doesn't fall into, I guess, like a layer 2, like a rollup or something like that. But I think that doesn't even really matter at the end of the day. I think what matters is kind of like what each scaling solution does on the technical side and on the social side. And just obviously disclosure here, I'm an advisor to Polygon, but I want to use the Polygon kind of, I guess, POS chain as the perfect example of something that is socially scalable and technically scalable as well, but is not kind of like a competitor to Ethereum. Just because it's not a true L2 or something like that doesn't mean that it is parasitic to Ethereum, doesn't mean that it's taking activity away from Ethereum. Because when you think about it, people are using the POS chain because they can't use Ethereum. They can't afford to use Ethereum right now. And for the longest time that this POS chain has been live for, since basically the start of this year, the rollups haven't been out. Like Optimism only really started kind of like releasing things in July with Uniswap, Arbitrum only recently, and those are still very limited as well. They can only scale as much as basically Ethereum's L1 right now, and they've still got training wheels on. There's still kind of like centralized controls and levers, which is totally fine. Like, I think that's okay. But at the same time, if users can't use Ethereum, they're going to go elsewhere. So my kind of logic with the Polygon POS chain is that it works as a very nice kind of like pressure release valve for the Ethereum ecosystem, where we can still keep people in the Ethereum family, because I view the POS chain as like an allied nation to Ethereum, for example, rather than something very competitive like a Solana or kind of like whatever other chain you want to kind of think. I don't want to pick out what chains are what, but like a Tezos, I guess, or something like that. The things that have been antagonistic towards Ethereum and obviously want to share take Ethereum's market share away. So from that perspective, we shouldn't expect users to wait to use the best thing ever, right? To use the fully decentralized, fully secure rollup in its final form, because those things are still a very kind of like far way away. We have rollups live today, but as I said, they still have a bunch of different centralized controls and stuff like that, and they're still very early in their life, and they're not basically at full capacity or anything like that, which is again totally fine, but in the meantime, we have these users coming in who just literally cannot afford to use Ethereum's layer 1. It's not that they don't want to, it's that they can't afford to. If they're coming with $100 and want to do kind of like more than one thing on layer 1, they can't. And I totally understand that. Like, not everyone has tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars that they've made off crypto over the last kind of year to kind of like wish-wash the fees away. Like, I totally get that. And I think that from that perspective, we should be embracing sidechains. We should be embracing the Polygon POS chain and other kind of EVM compatible sidechains that are friendly with Ethereum. I don't think that we should be embracing things that are not friendly, like BSC, for example, not friendly, a bunch of other kind of chains and stuff. I don't think that we should embrace those, because that's just kind of like feeding users to our competition. So if we're stuck in like this hard place where the users that want to use Ethereum can't do it because of the fees. They can't do it on layer 2, or they couldn't until recently. And you know, they're looking for somewhere to go. Well, instead of them going to competitors, why not get them to go to the POS, the Polygon POS chain, and do their stuff there? Yes, it's less secure and less decentralized than Ethereum. Yes, there are central points of failure, and kind of like central points along the way, especially the bridge contract, which is just like a 5 of 7 multi-sig right now. But at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter. What matters is keeping the users in the Ethereum ecosystem. And that's not to say that the POS chain will kind of like fade away over time as rollups become more mature. I think sidechains are always going to have their place, or commit chains, or whatever you want to call it. Or the POS chain, or what, will always have their place for different kind of things. And I'm hopeful that maybe one day the POS chain can basically get turned into a rollup or something like that, right? Where essentially you just migrate over to a fully mature ZK rollup or whatever, and then we kind of get to that point. But I think that's still years away. I don't think that's coming anytime soon. So in the meantime, to Scott's point here, we should embrace all of these solutions, whether they be technical or socially scalable, or both. There should not be a kind of warring factions within Ethereum about this, because as I said, at the end of the day, if they don't go to the Polygon POS chain, they're going to go elsewhere. They're going to go to competitor chains. At least that's been the case maybe up until recently, but even still, as I said, the rollups aren't mature enough yet. And I know there's different kind of trade-offs here. Like obviously with the POS chain on Polygon, it has its own kind of like validator set. It has like that bridge that I just spoke about. And there's different kind of like, I guess like central points of failure there. But as I said before, these rollups, like the Arbitrum and Optimisms of the world and stuff like that, they have centralized sequences. Only they can process transactions, which means they can either front run you, or they can censor you. They have upgradable contracts. They have all sorts of things on there that kind of like are these central points of failure. So scaling Ethereum is not something, to the point where you have, almost the same security guarantees as layer 1 on layer 2 or on a side chain. That's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a long process. So in the meantime, let's just embrace all of these solutions and build. Let's stop kind of like fighting, and stop kind of like having this elitism about certain solutions, and just embrace what's ready today. Because I mean, as I said, if we don't, then competitors are going to harp on about this and kind of like still gain market share from Ethereum. Not that I think that that's like a huge deal right now, because the pie is so small that, and it's going to get so much bigger from here, that I don't think any solution or any kind of like chain should be worrying about stealing market share from other chains at this point in time. But I would love to keep the people in the Ethereum ecosystem, in the Ethereum ecosystem, even if they can't afford Ethereum layer 1. And one way of doing that is the POS chain. The other way is kind of like rollups and layer 2s and stuff like that. So from that perspective, I think that, let's just shut up about it, embrace it, and build. But yeah, there's a little bit more info in my newsletter about this, but I'm going to move on to another kind of like related tweet from Patrick McCorry here, who put together this tweet that I thought was really good. He said, an underappreciated fact of rollups is the potential for experimentation. This includes new blockchain protocols, new virtual machines and smart contracts, including ZK VMs, new fee models. The 2015 dream of sidechains, while retaining main chain security, is alive and well. So use, build, and play. So what he's referring to here is this 2015 dream is basically from the Bitcoiner camp. They kind of had this dream of like scaling via layers and via sidechains and kind of inheriting Bitcoin security. But unfortunately, because Bitcoin doesn't have the expressive kind of base layer, it's much harder to scale at layer 2 than it is for something like Ethereum. And actually, on a related note here, I should mention that the way you should think about Ethereum and Bitcoin and other networks, and kind of like, I guess, mainly Ethereum and Bitcoin, is that they're settlement layers. Now, what I mean by this is that Ethereum layer 1 is a settlement layer, or will be a settlement layer in the future for layer 2. It will not be the layer that most users, or almost all users, sit on, because we're basically, the way you scale computation is you take it off layer 1, put it on layer 2, and then you can kind of like do all the computation up there, and then just settle that computation on layer 1. That's how these layer 2s work, with the batching of transactions, with posting data to layer 1. Even that doesn't have to be posted to layer 1. You can kind of keep that off chain as well, but there's additional trust assumptions there, of course. But essentially, I think what people are kind of like have a wrong frame of mind about is they think Ethereum is competing with other layer 1 blockchains that are trying to scale at layer 1. Like Ethereum will still scale on layer 1 via sharding, but it's kind of a little bit different because they're going to be data shards which just enhance layer 2. It's not going to be executable shards. So from that perspective, the other chains are competing with Ethereum's layer 2 ecosystem, and Ethereum's like a layer 2 ecosystem is so amazing because it gets to inherit the layer 1 security and gets to settle on there, and we have this like super secure proof of work chain, and then we're going to have like an even more secure proof of stake chain once the merge goes through to kind of like settle on. So that's how you should think about the way that layered scaling approach. I get the other approaches of wanting to scale everything on layer 1. I don't agree with them. I don't think they're sustainable, and I don't think they'll actually be able to scale past their kind of like limits that they have due to hardware and stuff like that. So from that perspective, to Patrick's kind of tweet here, the exciting thing about layer 2s is that you don't have to change anything on layer 1 to do this, because you get this kind of like wide design space at layer 2 to do whatever you want, and you can basically bootstrap your layer 2 by just settling it to Ethereum, settling its security there. You can do stuff like this. You can create entirely new blockchains that sit on top of Ethereum and just inherit its security, but you can do anything with it. You can have different kind of like transactions per second, of course. You can have different block times and stuff like that. You can have different batch times or different kind of technologies, optimistic rollups, ZK rollups, whatever. And then inside of that, you can have new virtual machines. You don't have to use the Ethereum virtual machine or the EVM, which means you can do new smart contract stuff. Like Starkware has their Stark OS, which is kind of like their own kind of little VM virtual machine with their own Cairo programming language, and they have all this tooling that they're building around it and stuff like that. And then on top of that, you can get new fee models as well. You don't have to copy what Ethereum is doing. You don't have to have the 1559 style fee model. You can do something else, or you can do meta transactions natively at the protocol layer. You can do all sorts of things because you're not limited by, I guess, the kind of like layer 1 constricts. You're basically inheriting layer 1 security while also being able to move much faster because, you can start off centralized or whatever. Obviously, Ethereum is decentralized, so it's much harder to change the base protocol. But also, changing layer 1 Ethereum affects everything. Changing your own layer 2 that you're building on top of Ethereum only affects your layer 2. And that's the beautiful thing about it, is that you have this siloed risk. And that's why the Ethereum layer, being a settlement layer and being conservative in how it develops over time, is so important, because if the base is kind of like weak, if the base changes and is insecure, then everything built on top cannot survive. It's kind of like the base of a hotel building, for example, right? Like a massive hotel building in the city. If the base, the structural base is weak, if in say 5 years it's going to lose its sturdiness and collapse, well, the whole building's going to collapse. There's nothing stopping that from happening. Whereas if like the top floor of the building for some reason just kind of like catches on fire or whatever, then the building is built in such a way where that top floor of the building is kind of like isolated from the rest of it. It's not going to bring the kind of like whole building down, unless the fire I guess travels to different floors and stuff like that. But they're usually not designed like that. And on that note, that's the same with Ethereum. If the base layer, if something happens on the base layer, it can potentially affect everything else built on top. But if something happens at a layer 2, say the layer 2 gets like exploited and all the funds are drained, well, that only affects that layer 2. That does not affect the other layer 2s. It does not affect Ethereum itself. And that's exactly why you can, the roll-up centric roadmap for Ethereum, the layered scaling approach is just so much cooler because you're not limited anymore. You're basically having the awesome security of Ethereum while also having the ability to experiment as much as you want on layer 2. And this just, again, is another reason why I think the layered approach to scaling is the correct way to go about it when it comes to blockchain networks, rather than the let's scale everything on layer 1 and kind of like increase hardware costs to compensate for that and kind of hit scaling limits anyway. I just, and obviously there are trade-offs here. You lose some composability, you fragment liquidity and stuff like that. But if the world is going to be multi-chain anyway, then that doesn't really matter, because there are going to be solutions that come out, like the bridge solutions that I talk about all the time, and other kind of things like the L1 to L2 asynchronous communication technologies, like the relayers. That's all coming. Some of it's here already, more of it's coming. These things are not problems that are unsolvable. They're just trade-offs. This whole space is just trade-offs. That's all it is, the entire ecosystem. It's what trade-off have you made to achieve something? Is it a good trade-off? Yes or no? no? Is it long-term sustainable? Yes or no? Is it, going to affect your decentralization security? Yes or no? If you take the trade-off of requiring supernodes to run your chain, well, then you've given up decentralization, or at least a lot of decentralization. You've given up inclusivity for people to be able to validate the chain. You've made it harder for things to kind of like sync over time. But in return, you've got scalability, or at least short to medium term scalability, and you've got cheap fees and all that sort of stuff. But if you take the layered Ethereum approach, you have to go through this transitioning period of the L1 being like super high fees for end users and the L2 ecosystem not being mature yet. And again, that's to my point before about how I was saying people should use the Polygon POS chain, even though it's less secure. It's kind of like, at least you can use it, right? You can't use Ethereum if you don't have a lot of money right now. So from that perspective, there's kind of like just trade-offs on both approaches. But for me, the trade-off of Ethereum right now, not kind of like blowing out the gas limit, kind of like trying to scale at layer one to just compensate just in the meantime to kind of like get some short-term scaling. The trade-off of that is long-term kind of, I guess, like state bloat and less decentralization and stuff like that. I just don't think it's worth it. I think that, we're taking a bet on this trade-off. We're basically saying we can kind of wait a little bit longer. We can transition the ecosystem to layer two. We got side chains that can help. We've got other ecosystems that can help and stuff like that. And once we get to that point where we have like all the users on layer two and L1 is truly just a settlement layer where the L2 settle to, there's some whales sitting on there and stuff like that, providing liquidity, and anyone who can afford to be on there will be on there. I think that is the very sustainable long-term approach at the end of the day. But anyway, I'm going to move on from that. Speaking of bridges, Elias Simos, I think Simos or Simos, from kind of like Coinbase here at Bison Trails, put out a nice little dashboard on Dune Analytics today, which is basically a bridge dashboard. So you can see here the total value locked in different bridges going in and out of Ethereum, such as the Polygon bridge, the Solana, Phantom, Avalanche, Arbitrum, all these bridges, right? You can see the value locked in them broken down here on the chart on the left. Then on the right, you can see the unique depositors, stuff like that. Market share, over time, relative TVL, asset distribution, all those sorts of things. So, I mean, I love Dune Analytics. Disclosure, I'm an investor in Dune Analytics, but I invested because I love them, and I've been supporting them for a very long time. But these dashboards are just an awesome way to visualize kind of like how things are evolving, how things are going in the ecosystem. And, it's funny to see, this orange bit here is Avalanche, and you'll note that like a few weeks ago, Avalanche did this thing called DeFi Rush, which is just this massive liquidity mining program for Avalanche, and so everyone like plowed into the bridge, right? And then you can see here this large kind of like pink is Polygon, and you can see how much growth Polygon has had since kind of like May, and the growth's been steady and kind of like taking off again here, and then all the minority bridges here, all the smaller ones and stuff like that. What really caught my eye though was this kind of like unique depositors thing here. This is like tiny numbers. Like, look at this. I mean, if you kind of like look at Avalanche's unique depositors, like each day, it's kind of like a couple thousand at peak. I mean, I think peak was like what, 3,000 or something like that. Then, I mean, the Polygon one at peak was like 4,300. This is like tiny numbers. Like, we just keep fighting over like who's got what market share when we haven't even onboarded 99.9% of the world. So why are we even bothering fighting? Like, the pie is going to get so incredibly like stupidly bigger. I spoke about this, I think, last week on the Refuel when I talked about the valuations of kind of this market and how I think the total crypto market cap is going to go to multiple hundreds of trillions of dollars, which means the whole pie is just going to get so absolutely massive that there's going to be plenty of market share and users to go around. And right now we're all fighting over this tiny little thing, which is mostly existing users just jumping between different chains to kind of earn some money here and there. That's not the way to think about it. The way to think about it is, let's just keep building, because we're about to onboard hundreds of millions, if not billions of people over the next 5 to 10 years. So let's just stop thinking about this kind of day-to-day bickering and following things and saying, this is going to kill this because the price went up and this price went up and I made money here. It's just all recency bias. It's just all short-term thinking. It is not sustainable to think like this. And I preach this a lot on the Refuel and the newsletter, that long-term thinking is how you win in this ecosystem, whether that be financially win or socially win. Short-term thinking is just going to end up getting you wrecked. It's going to end up making you like anxious. It's going to end up making you upset, especially if you're kind of, I guess, like tied to different kind of ecosystems and stuff like that. So best to think that the pie, think about the fact that the pie is going to get much bigger from here, and we're just like really scratch the surface of all of this sort of stuff here. So, Loopring I guess, shared a blog post today from their CTO, Steve, called What is the Real Future of Layer 2 Networks? This is a 14-minute read, so it's quite a long blog post here. But essentially, this is an amazing blog post. I mean, I read through most of it today. It basically goes through optimistic rollups, ZK rollups, Loopring, of course, the different solutions out there like ZK Sync, Starkware, stuff like that, and kind of like compares them, talks about kind of like how they work and all that sort of stuff. I highly recommend giving this post a read if you want to kind of have a look at the kind of like future of what layer 2 is going to look like. I think a lot of it is definitely stuff that I've said kind of like on the refill before, which is awesome for me. It kind of like validates my view and my thesis on things, because this is coming directly from the CTO of a protocol that has been working on layer 2 stuff for a very long time. Loopring was one of the first ZK rollups live on Ethereum, if not the first. I don't know if they're actually the first, but they were definitely one of the earliest, and they've been growing and they've been kind of like promoting the virtues of layer 2 for a very long time now. So if anyone knows, you know, how to kind of describe this technology, the trade-offs, the benefits and all that sort of stuff, it's definitely Loopring. So definitely go check out this blog post when you get a chance. All right, I think this is the last thing about Layer 2. So Lyra announced today that they have integrated with 1inch on Optimism. So you can now basically use the 1inch decentralized exchange aggregator on kind of Lyra to to provide in-app swapping, which is really cool. So obviously accessing the best pricing across multiple liquidity sources in DeFi. 1inch uses Pathfinder, which is their kind of like I think proprietary algorithm, which finds the best pairs across like Ethereum, BSC, Polygon, and optimistic Ethereum, of course, and all that sort of stuff. So, in this post has more detail about it, and how to use it, and how it's directly integrated. You could see there on the GIF, if you just click swap at the top here, it kind of like brings up this, which is powered by 1inch, which is really, really cool. So it's not like you have to go to a different site. You can just stay on a different website, a different app. You can just stay on Lyra and do this directly from the app, which I thought was really cool. But yeah, the blog post has more details. Definitely go check that out if you haven't already. So the EPNS project announced today that they are kind of like beginning their journey to decentralizing the protocol over time. So there's this tweet thread and this blog post here that basically describes how they're going to go towards community-governed push notifications using the push ERC20 governance token. Now, disclosure, I'm a seed investor in EPNS here, but I think this is really cool to see. I think it's awesome when projects or protocols at least kind of like do or at least try to decentralize from the start, like from very early on, rather than leaving it to later. Because if you leave it to later, it becomes harder, because what ends up happening is that it's sort of like what happened with Uniswap, where they had a massive community and they basically said, okay, well, here's the token. You can do governance now. We'll do decentralized governance. And what ends up happening is you have way too many people in the kitchen. You have no kind of like, I guess, I wouldn't call it centralized leadership, but you have no stewardship at the higher levels, because Uniswap Labs released this and basically wiped their hands with it because they didn't want any regulatory pressure. And what that leads to is basically indecision and kind of a little bit of a mess. And I'm just using Uniswap as an example. There's plenty of other examples out there, but that's why I like to see kind of decentralization and setting up kind of like these DAOs and governance things from the start here. So there are kind of like 4 roles within EPNS governance. The first is a push nominee, which are community members who can be delegated push to vote on proposals. A push delegate, nominees who have 75,000 push delegated and can create new proposals. Push delegator, push token holders who can vote and or delegate tokens. And push champions, individuals from across the ecosystem who help champion the EPNS governance framework and keep the community updated. Now, this blog post goes through each of these in detail. It's quite a detailed blog post. I'm really glad that they kind of like described it all here and how it's all going to work, and how I guess like the governance process in general will work with the push tokens, and you can kind of see like the distribution of tokens and stuff like that as well. So definitely go check out this blog post if you haven't already. So this new DAO, I guess, called EnterDAO was announced yesterday, and they claim to be building a gateway to the metaverse. So they were announced, and they also, they came out of stealth, and they also announced their fundraise. So they raised $1.75 million in a seed round from a bunch of different kind of investors in the ecosystem here. Backers from kind of like LimeChain, Universe, XYZ, and Barnbridge here. And these are part of like the core team as well, which is cool to see. So you can see the core team, kind of like everyone working on on it here. But essentially what EnterDAO describes it as itself as is a decentralized organization on the Ethereum blockchain founded with the mission to build products enabling new markets within the metaverse economy. Through a lineup of core products, EnterDAO aims to empower users, metaverse landowners, investors, brands, and degens of all kinds by tackling pain points like access to metaverse land, its capital efficiency, as well as UX and onboarding to metaverse games. So their immediate roadmap includes a DAO governance module, yield farming campaign, NFT drop, and most importantly, 2 core products. EnterDAO will be governed by the Enter token, of course, and more details are coming in their white paper. So it's just a kind of like, I guess, exit stealth announcement here. This kind of looks to me like something like Yield Guild, where essentially creating a DAO where people can kind of like come together, tackle the pain points of getting involved with different kind of like NFTs or metaverse stuff, whether that be not being able to kind of get access to an NFT to play a game because it's too expensive, so you just kind of like borrow it and stuff like that. So yeah, this is cool to see another kind of player entering this arena here. But as I said, there's not much more details in the blog post, but they say a white paper is coming soon. So this person from the Ethereum Foundation, I've come across him before. His name is actually very similar to mine. I thought it was funny, and he's in Ethereum. His name's Antonio Sanso. It's just so similar to my name. But anyway, enough about that. He basically published a blog post today on the Ethereum Foundation's blog called "Secured #1: Protecting the Ethereum Consensus Layer." So this seems to be following in, I guess, the kind of vein of the posts from Danny Ryan when he does kind of like finalized, which is covering kind of like the proof of stake consensus layer in the research and development side of things. Whereas this blog post series seems to be wanting to cover the kind of like security of the consensus layer, that being the proof of stake beacon chain. So basically, this post is a small update on the security kind of like stuff that's happening there, what they're doing, BLS signatures, stuff like that. I mean, it's pretty technical, but if you're interested in this sort of stuff, definitely go read this blog post. And from the looks of things, it's going to be a series as well. So definitely keep up with what Antonio Sanso is doing here. All right, last thing I wanted to talk about was this interesting metric that CoinMetrics put out today, where they said Ethereum added more than 6.2 million addresses that are holding 0.01 to 1 ETH from year to date. So from the beginning of the year to today, there's been 6.2 million new addresses that are either holding 0.01 to 1 ETH. Now, they say here user adoption is growing rapidly and was not meaningfully impacted by the crash, being kind of like the I guess like the crash over the like maybe May and June, and like the recent one as well. But the funny thing is that I think when you look at these kind of charts, you have to contextualize them. And I know I do this on the data pump, which I know I owe you guys. It's been like 3 months since I did the last one. I promised to get one out soon. I'm going to try really hard to do it this weekend. I just need to find the time. But anyway, the way I would contextualize this chart is that the Ethereum network's been expensive to use for a while, so you need ETH to just for the gas fees. Like if you want to do a Uniswap trade, it's like what, $50 at 100 Gwei or something like that. So that is at current price of ETH. I mean, that's what it's 0.015 ETH or something like that. Right? So everyone who's got more than 0.01 or 0.015 ETH just to pay the fee to use Uniswap is already going to fall into this. So I think as the fees trend up in dollar terms, they also kind of like obviously trend up in ETH terms as well. And then you get kind of like this happening here. So for me, what I like to see is, I guess in context as well, this makes sense because it means that more users are kind of using the chain, but they need kind of like ETH to pay the gas fees and all that sort of stuff. But it's just like very nuanced where it's like, okay, well, are they, how much kind of like is this is new users, or how much is it people using new addresses and kind of like having ETH in there to pay fees or whatever? How much is going to fees? I mean, obviously a lot is going to fees and all that sorts of stuff. So I tend to look at these on the data pump videos. I usually look at the metrics that are higher than this, like 1 ETH or more, or kind of like 10 ETH or more, rather than 0.01. Maybe 0.01's too kind of like, I guess, small here to take into account the gas fees. Maybe you want to kind of like do something like $1,000. So like 0.03 or something as your baseline, because $1,000, I mean, the gas fees aren't that high, but maybe someone's just put $1,000 into Ethereum and he's playing around with it. They've got $1,000 worth of ETH. They want to go use some DeFi. They want to go do some things. And obviously they're paying fees as well. So I'll go over this more on the next data pump that I do, because as I said, this is one of the metrics I look at. But always, always when you see metrics, you need to put them in context. You can't just take them at face value. And this is the same for any metric in life. I mean, you can use a metric to paint any narrative that you want. That's why whenever I see things like this, not to say CoinMetrics is trying to paint any narrative one way or the other, but when I see generally kind of like metrics being posted by people and people are trying to paint a narrative about it, I kind of like dig deeper and say, okay, what are the nuances here? What is actually true and what's not true? What's a gray area? All that sorts of stuff. So yeah, just a kind of little bit of a, I guess, context around that. But I think that's going to be it for today. So thank you everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give that video a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all next week. Thanks, everyone.